Good Friday morning, friends. My name is Don,
My name is Jonathan.
and welcome back for another episode of the Finding God in the Dark podcast. This week, we are talking about the 2012, I think this film was.
Yeah,
Um,
it's 2000.
Rian Johnson written and directed film called Looper, stars Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Emily Blunt. Um, Basic premise, it's time looping hitman movie. Is that a good way to kind of sum it up?
Yeah, it's a science fiction movie with some depth. So
Well, definitely that. So, um, yeah, I mean, look, again, it's 13, 14 years old almost at this point. So we're going to spoil stuff.
yes, I was
Sorry.
gonna say there's no good way to talk about this movie without spoiling it. So
There really isn't. All right. Well, where do you want to start, John?
um, I would um probably lean towards starting just about the idea of what makes a life and what gives life meaning. I thought that was an interesting part of this movie.
Yeah, say more.
Well, I mean, um, I'm gonna refer to them as old Joe and young Joe because I feel like
Yeah.
it's the only way to kind of keep the conversation going. But old Joe feels like his life was saved by his wife. I don't think we ever get a name for her. Yeah, I don't remember it
No.
in the movie.
No.
Um, and um, and so for him, his life has meaning around her, and he's willing to give up everything else, including his ethics, to have this thing that he feels like has given his life meaning. And in the end, young Joe decides to sacrifice himself for the good of others because he realizes that old Joe was wrong and he had gotten stuck in his selfishness, not in meaning about his life. And I feel
Yeah.
like one interesting thing to talk about this movie is how sometimes we can confuse our meaning with what we want. And those two things don't
Hmm.
necessarily perfectly overlap.
Yeah, and for those who haven't seen the film, when John says old Joe and young Joe, they are two distinct characters on the screen, but they are the same person at different ages,
Yeah.
interacting with one another. Now, look, if you saw Time Cop, they shouldn't be able to touch one another, right? Because they do. The same matter can't exist in the same space, and they go and disappear. But
Obviously they did not they were not written by the same person. So
and of course, we don't. No one knows the physics of time travel anyway. So,
yeah.
uh, yeah, it's an interesting take, because it places young Joe as the wiser of the two.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe that's because he's learned what he's going to be like going down that path.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like what he's become, and how he got there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's, I mean, the ethics of this film are really, what's a good word? Sketchy. Um,
To me they're very complicated. They're not straightforward at all because you have you can understand in a lot of ways you can understand old Joe's motives, right? He's primarily driven by the fact that his wife who saved him was killed and he feels like, you know, he wants to be back with her. But he also is being motivated by the idea of killing a person that at least at the beginning of the film and throughout the toward the till until the end appears to be pure evil, kind of like a superpowered Hitler, if
yeah,
you will. Like,
yeah,
he's taking over all the criminal factions in the future. He is wiping out all his enemies, and you get the sense that he's probably not going to be content with stopping at wiping out all his enemies and controlling the criminal underworld.
Go ahead.
Okay. Um, no, I just I you know so anyway, um, old Joe is motivated by the idea of basically killing a superhero or a superhuman Hitler, right? This person that we first hear about as the Rainmaker is is super powerful. In the future, there's 10% of the population that has the ability to move things with their minds, but the
Mhm.
vast majority of people that can do this, they are called TKs, can do simple tricks like move a quarter around.
Floating a quarter, yeah.
You know, but Sarah, Sid's mother, the child in the movie, who ends up, we learn at the very end, is the Rainmaker. Um, she can move bigger objects, and you kind of presuppose that she's given this gift to her son, who has it in spades. So
Right.
has 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times the ability, so that he can move huge amounts of things. He can also just kind of kill people if he gets angry.
Yeah,
And
by basically turning himself into a bomb.
so you have I mean, there is a theological, or not theological, a philosophical kind of mind exercise that was developed a long time ago after World War II, obviously. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you? And this
Right.
movie is essentially that. If you could go back
Right.
in time and kill baby Hitler, would you? And the movie asks an interesting question, which is, um, how did baby Hitler get shaped? And what if you could give baby Hitler a happy childhood and a loving environment and not a bad environment?
Right.
And that's basically kind of where we get at the end of the movie is young Joe kind of feels like Sarah does love her son. He was motivated in large part because Sarah was killed in front of him and he lost the person, his aunt, who he thought was his mother earlier.
Hmm.
And that will ultimately motivate him to do evil. Maybe if I save Sarah and allow her to take care of him and love him, he'll be a different person and maybe he'll use
Right.
this amazing gift for good and to help people.
Right.
It's a
Well,
huge
well,
risk, you
well,
know.
well, right, because we're going to apply what if logic and redeem Hitler's arcs, redeem Hitler's story arc,
Yeah.
which is one of those where you go, ooh, that's risky.
Yes. And it is risky at the same time. To me, it's a beautiful question because Hitler just didn't appear.
Right.
Hitler was shaped by
Sure.
his environment. He was shaped by a really broken mother and father. He was shaped
And
by bad experiences, you know.
and I mean, let's be fair, all of the problem children and the problem adults or whatever, I
Yeah.
mean, are dealing with, or okay, let's put it a different way. They're not dealing with unresolved issues from their childhood, right? Or
Mhm.
from their upbringing or from whatever. I mean, those who are, handling the world have probably friends. I'm going to be honest here. If you feel like you need therapy, get therapy.
Yes. Yes.
If you want a reference, I happen to know a really good therapist. Um, I share a house with her.
I would
But
I would even go so far to say if you're a human being, it would be worthwhile to do some therapy, even if you don't end up doing it long term.
I absolutely cannot disagree with that. I have personally seen a couple of therapists in my life just because, there were periods that I needed to process stuff that I couldn't process on my own. And
Yeah.
and they were helpful to get me through those things. And you know, that's just that's just trying to live. Um It's an interesting thing to come out of a sci-fi movie, right?
Yeah.
Because and you
Yeah,
don't
and
really look at it that way initially, like it's some kind of a sci-fi movie until all of a sudden, boom, this guy appears out of nowhere, you know.
yeah, and to me it's interesting, and but to me this movie is an interesting it'd be an interesting movie to show when you're talking about the difference between Reformed theology and Wesleyan theology,
Oh,
because
so the Lab's Presbyterian in one of my churches who's always talking to me about Calvinism, I should watch this with him.
well, no, honestly, because Calvinism, I mean, I'm gonna try to steelman their belief,
Hmm.
but it basically boils down to that when humanity fell into sin, however you want to imagine that happening,
Right.
we are totally depraved. We have lost all goodness. There is not an ounce of goodness. I would argue there's not an ounce of the image of God left in us. That's kind of their understanding. And in this movie, young Joe is not a Calvinist. He believes
Right.
it is possible that the divine spark, the divine image is still in Sid, and maybe love and grace from the person of Sarah can revive this spark.
So
And
so
yeah,
young Joe is the Arminian and old Joe is
young
the
Joe is the
Calvinist.
Arminian, and old Joe is the yes.
That's an interesting that's a really interesting spin, isn't it? I don't think Rian Johnson had that in mind when he wrote it.
No, but this is where when Gadamer, a well-known German literary critic in the 20th century, talked about whenever you come to a text, and a movie is still a text. Whenever you come to a movie or book, you add yourself to it. So your stuff, and you create something new. So whenever
Mhm.
you come to a text or a movie, you bring your baggage, and your baggage and the text in front of you create something new. And so I would argue that's what I'm doing. I'm taking what Rian Johnson beautifully gave me, and I'm adding my stuff to it, and I'm coming up with new things.
Yeah.
And I would argue, yeah, you can. This is, Calvinism and Arminianism, or Calvinism and Catholic thought, if you want, because this is where Methodists are more Catholic than we are Protestant.
Hmm.
Um, you could argue that's one of the big discussions of Christianity. How does salvation work? Are we totally depraved, or is there goodness in us? And is there an image of God still left in us that God, through God's grace, revives? And, obviously, my viewpoint. I believe that we're not totally depraved, and we don't lose everything. Sin does not overwhelm completely God's grace. And so there is the divine register in all of us, even when we're fallen. And so, in a weird way, I kind of understand where young Joe what young Joe goes for. This idea of maybe this kid with love and grace can become something different than the Rainmaker.
And that's I mean you're going to that's the theology you're going to get from us.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly.
friends, John and I may disagree on some things, but when it comes to, Wesleyan theology, we are on the same page. Um,
Yeah, and again, this is for those who are uninitiated in theology.
mhm.
In terms of the Western, because this is Western talk we're having. If we had an Orthodox person come in, they'd have a different take on original sin completely. So this is a Western conversation, but this is a major Western conversation. This is a big conversation among Protestants, and it's where a lot of Protestants deeply divide from Catholic thought. Is
Mhm.
this idea that total depravity is not, or is how life works? That's basically the big rub. Are we totally lost in sin, or is there something of God's divine grace left in us after sin?
Yeah, and
And that is a big conversation.
I think a little of that comes from, interpretations of Romans, right? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Yes,
Yeah.
true. But, is your sin, even the smallest of sins, is that, irredeemable? See, I think that's the difference. That's where the difference falls between, um, you know, sort of a Presbyterian thinking and a more Arminian thinking, right?
Yeah.
Calvinist
I mean,
versus a Methodist.
it basically, in a lot of ways, boils down to the Bible, our sacred text, and our traditions have always held up two things. One, that God is sovereign,
Hmm.
and two, that we have free will. And Christians and other people too, but Christians have tried to struggle how to fit those puzzle pieces together,
Right.
but to say that they're both true. And Jacob Arminius and Wesley, who inherited that through Anglican tradition, they answer it one way. I usually say they usually tip toward human or free will more.
Hmm.
And Calvin, and to a lesser extent Luther, answered it more with the idea of God as sovereign, and they tip more toward that.
Right.
But all Christians have to figure out how to make peace with both of those ideas and how to try to how to connect those two puzzle pieces.
It's
If you're trying to be faithful to the Bible and to the tradition, I feel like you have to figure out some way to hold those two things together.
Yeah.
But as is a common theme in Christianity and all human endeavors, we all don't answer that question the same way.
No, we don't. It's interesting that you were doing this because I had the same kind of motion,
Yeah,
and the terminology that I recall distinctly from seminary was dialectical tension,
yeah,
right? That you have these two very contrasting ideas, and both can be true at the same time, but you have
yeah,
to hold them in this sort of dialectical tension where they converse back and forth, and sometimes one is more prominent, and sometimes the other is more prominent, and still they're both true.
yeah,
Um, and that's, look, you come to a really deep theological idea like this, that's
yeah,
harder.
yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
lot harder.
and I do want to make it very clear. To me, this is a secondary issue. The Calvinists and Presbyterians that disagree with me on this I strongly disagree with them, but they're not. They are still Christians.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is an inter squad debate.
Exactly. And I will reference it over to the fellow from one of my churches who he
Yeah,
calls himself a lapsed Presbyterian. He's
yeah,
he comes out to church every Sunday. If he's not going to be there, he's going to text me, let me know why they're not going to be there. I mean, he's very faithful. He's very involved. His family, his wife, and his kids are all very involved. And but we have these kinds of conversations periodically because he still holds some very Calvinistic thinking, you know. And I'm just gently nudging him over to the right side of the argument.
yeah. You know, I like to with my Presbyterian friends who are very passionate about TULIP, which is the acronym for 5 point
Right.
Calvinism. We're not going to
Mhm.
unpack all that because we
No,
wouldn't
no,
have
let's
time.
not.
But I often say when they get frustrated with the fact that I don't agree with them, I'll go like, "Well, God predestined me to disagree with you."
Exactly. Exactly right.
um, so yeah, it's a little inside humor for um, what
Theological nerds. That was all.
yeah.
That was for all of you.
But you know, I've always thought it would be interesting to do a movie series where you take key Christian doctrines and show a movie to help have a conversation about them. And
Mm,
I didn't think about this movie in that idea, but this movie would be an interesting movie to have that conversation about how do we deal with free will and sovereignty.
yeah.
Is because the question is basically, is the Rainmaker destined to be evil, or is the Rainmaker somebody who could turn into a holy man that could make positive changes for the world?
Right. by more grace,
Yeah,
more grace active in his life at a
yeah,
young age
yeah,
rather than tragedy. Sure. Uh, and nobody can realistically answer that question. And of course, the movie leaves that up in the air. We don't know.
yeah, yeah.
We're left with, well, he's going to be different. That's
Yes.
pretty much what we're left with. He's going to be
Yeah.
different. We don't know how, but he's going to
Yeah.
be different.
Yeah.
Um, so what else? There's
There's actually, I know this may sound weird for people to think about, but this is one of the things I really like about Rian Johnson's movies, even ones like the Last Jedi, which I know a lot of people don't like, is he tends to weave in really interesting, deep conversations in his movies. And I really enjoy movies that make you think and, have fun. I mean, this is a fun action movie. This is a very exciting, it keeps you on kind of the seat of the chair, the seat of the end of your chair. But it also gives you some really interesting things to think about. Like,
yeah.
what is the right answer? Is old Joe right or is young Joe right? Like those kind of things. One I don't know. One thing that's in here that I think is also had I've thought about a lot was the power of love versus the power of anger. And
Oh yeah, that's a strong theme.
one of the things that has shaped my spiritual life is my encounter with Buddhism. And so I kind of engaged with Buddhism in a period of time where I was really kind of disconnected from the church. I obviously am now back fully in the church, but the things I have learned from Buddhism have helped me better, in some ways, better understand what I think the Christian faith is about, to be honest. And I am doing a month long kind of online meditation thing to kind of get back into a meditation practice. And it's being led by a Buddhist group. But one of the things that one of the teachers said that really made me think is, and I think is really an excellent piece of advice is we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. And that idea in this movie about the power of love versus the power of anger, you have Sid who has this superhuman power, and you see one time where he allows anger to be how he responds. Very moment in the movie where he kills somebody. You have another moment where he chooses to respond in love and grace and chooses a different path, and the person ends up, not being hurt by him. And he kind of submits himself. They're both the same situation, right? His mother is in danger. You
Right.
know, someone he deeply loves is in danger. And one time he responds in anger, and the other time he responds in some regard as forgiveness and love. And I love the fact that they were both the same situation and he chose different times to respond differently. And it just made me think of that quote from the teacher a couple days ago, that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. And
Yeah.
that is true whether you're a Christian or a Buddhist. There's truth to that.
I say that to my boys all the time, and it's something that my dad, I think, unconsciously taught me as a kid,
Yeah,
like, well, the kids are picking on you. Well, you can only control how you respond,
yeah.
right? My dad would say, if you don't give them the response they want, they're going to leave you alone,
Yeah.
right? Which is, so you control you, right?
Yes.
I tell my boys the same thing. I say, other people only have as much power over you as you give them by your responses.
Yeah. One of the best things I ever learned in counseling was you're the only person you can control.
Yeah. It's the truth. It's the truth. And it's an interesting thought experiment this film does with this boy. What's going to shape him more profoundly? Anger and loss,
Yeah.
or love and acceptance.
Yeah.
Um,
And I also think it's really powerful to think about the fact that old Joe becomes the evil he begins trying to fight, right?
Yeah,
His hate has turned him into somebody who killed a young child.
right.
Was willing to kill a mother and another young child.
Hmm.
You he turned into the very monster he, in his mind, was trying to defeat.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's more of a theme there about choices too, isn't it?
Yeah,
That our choices define us.
yeah,
Our choices define in the long run who we are.
yeah.
Um, and maybe at some point I'll get into some discussion about how my choices in my early life are defining where I'm at now, particularly about my health. But that's not for a vlog. That's not for a podcast discussion. Um, but yeah, that's I think that's a profound thought. And what's really interesting to me is we're talking about anger, right? And
Yeah.
and immediately I think of one of the icons of anger in all of popular culture is the Incredible Hulk,
Yeah.
right? You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
If I'm
And
angry.
when he's angry, he is a destructive force of nature.
Yeah.
And when he's and in order to bring him down, what do? Well, at least in the movies, it's this calming presence. It's the widow going, okay, it's time to rest. It's time to, it's sun's going down, that whole thing. Um, it's very much the same iconic kind of idea about anger, right?
Yeah.
Um, which look, I get it. We live in a culture that it is very, very easy to become angry.
Yes.
Um, we, you know, uh, we always think, our side's right, the other side's wrong, and if something's going wrong, then it's their fault, and I'm going to be angry at them, and I'm going to scream and holler, and I'm going to rage on the internet, and it doesn't do you a whole lot of good, folks. Let me tell you, it's it ain't helping in here, you know? It's not doing your heart any good, trust me.
Yeah. And I think if we are honest about the situations, most of the time, yelling and screaming shuts down productive change that we want to see
And
in
and
ourselves and
discussion.
in other people. Yeah.
And discussion, right? We talked about this October a year ago when we did the surviving the election live broadcast thing.
Yeah.
If you're yelling, if we had, and it was so funny that we had people that said, "Oh, what if you guys get in an argument?" Well, it kind of defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? Like the whole point is that we can talk about these things because it's important to talk about them and have the conversation, even if we walk away still disagreeing. The point is not to necessarily persuade the other person, but at least hear each other. Um, which, if you're angry, really difficult to do. You
Mhm.
know, I think we have to measure ourselves. In like, okay, I'm angry, but if I express out of anger, I'm destructive. I mean, just like the kid in
Yeah.
this film, I'm destructive. I may not kill somebody, but I'm going to kill relationships. I'm going to kill the atmosphere. I mean, whatever. It's not, and I get it. I mean, I understand. I get angry too, but you've got to, sometimes you just got to pull it back in. Because when you let it go, you are that rage monster. You are that force of nature. And trust me when I tell you, you're not going to get a whole lot accomplished.
No.
At least nothing positive. So,
Yeah. And
all right,
usually when we're angry, we hurt ourselves, which is
and
something.
and that's true too. And that's true too. We hurt ourselves, right? Um, we only got a few minutes left. Anything else that you think is really important to talk about here, John?
Um,
I'm looking
you
at
know,
our list.
just a reminder, even though there's violence and some nudity in this movie, drug use as well, it I really do think it's a really powerful movie to think about kind of life and how you're, and to me, one point that we're not going to be able to talk about because we spend our time other ways, haha. Um, but this movie is also about a conversation about wasting time. You know, are how are you spending your life? Is it a valuable and worthwhile way you're spending your life, or are you succumbing to pleasures that are only momentary, that aren't going to produce anything of value for you or others? Because that's a theme in this movie as well.
It's really something about leaving a legacy, right? What is you can ask that question. What is your legacy? Is your legacy, I defeated solitaire 857 times,
Yes.
or is
Yeah.
it, something a little more of value than that? And it's a good question to ponder. I'll tell you the interesting thing about this film is you can come to this film going, okay, it's Bruce Willis, it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, it's an action film. Okay, wow, there's a sci-fi element to it, and yet, like you said, there's a lot more under the surface of this film that is really worth delving into. Um, I rented it on Amazon Prime, but I'm pretty sure that right after it was in theaters and came out on Blu-ray, I have it around here somewhere, but my stuff's so jumbled up for the last 2.5 years since we moved. I don't know where it is. Um, but I'm pretty sure I have this film
Life of a
because I
moving
liked it
pastor.
so much.
Yeah.
What's that?
The life of a moving pastor.
Well, that's true. That's true. There's sometimes if I turned off the background, you would see the chaos in my home office right now. It's just, but all right, friends. So I think final rec here is, yes, this is well worth watching, and there's a lot to talk about here. Um, Patrick, if you happen to watch this, um, this might be a film for us to talk about. Um, we'll see. There's some discussion going on, but I'll leave that for another time. So for next week, we have already picked a film, yes?
Yeah, that's right. We could go with what we talked about earlier. That's fine.
Yeah, this is going to be a this one might be a little more contentious. We'll
Well,
see.
I think it's a very I think in a weird way it kind of skewers both sides of the political divide. But I'll see if you agree with me. So
Yeah, it is definitely a lot of just from what I've seen, and I haven't watched the film yet, but a lot of political overtone in the film. It's called One Battle After Another. It is on HBO Max. So if you want to watch it, I'm pretty sure it's R-rated.
yeah,
I
it
know
is.
Leonardo
It has
DiCaprio's
sex.
in
It
it.
has violence. So again, be aware of that.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that next week.
Okay.
Until then, friends, keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all next Friday. Take care and God bless.
Bye.
Oh, hey, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Well, thanks for watching. We appreciate your support. And friends, if you find anything that's really wonderful or entertaining or helpful in your Christian walk, we want to encourage you to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video with your friends. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we hope that you continue to find these videos and these discussions entertaining and informative. Take care and God bless. Bye.